Good morning and welcome to this e-Memoir session. This morning we're going to be looking at rebuilding the FE brand in a fast-changing skills environment. We're joined by Beej Kaczmarczyk and also Geoff Barnsley joining us for the first time. We like to keep these sessions as interactive as possible, so please feel free to use the question or chat facility. I'll be making sure that you'll receive a copy of the video recording along with the slides and encourage you to share this with your team and your colleagues. If you're watching this now on a recording and there's any questions or thoughts that are raised, please feel free to get in contact with us. I'm going to hand over to Beej now and mute myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marek. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar. The title, as you can see, is Building the FE Brand in a Fast-Changing Skills Environment, although I've added the "re" in building, and we'll see why later on. I think the subsidiary strapline is quite important. It's not just about a new logo or a marketing strapline, and that's one of the messages we're trying to get over today. Joined this morning by Geoff Barnsley. Geoff, would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yes, just to let you know, I've been working in brands and change for 20 odd years now. I'm stressed I'm not an FE expert, worked across all manner of sectors, but just to let you know that all the brands I have worked with are what I would call experientials, i.e. they're not fast-moving consumer brands, they are brands that are delivered through people and process as well as communication. So.
And that's thanks very much, Geoff. That's very relevant to what we're talking about today, which of course is looking at the world of learning and all the different types of things that involves in terms of the types of learners and of course the types of products, the courses, the learning, the qualifications that we're offering them. And I want to start by actually having a look at those changes. And I think given that we're talking in 2017 about some of the most significant changes, certainly for years, in the different markets for learning, it's important to maybe reflect on those, as well as obviously the types of things that we're going to offer to our learners, whichever market they're in or whatever markets they're in. And I think if you look at that, this is a very apposite point to say, well, what's the implications of these changes in the markets for learning? Whether it be the levy and non-levy paying employers who will be behaving differently, will have different processes and systems after the 1st of May, quite significant changes. And I know many of you are gearing up in terms of a strategy and processes and procedures to meet the apprenticeship challenge. But there are also changes in the world of loans, whether those are adult learner loans for learners that are doing programs in FE, or obviously HE learners in different types of HE institutions. Big changes there. But let's not ignore the 16 to 19 learners who, through raising participation, are now participating in more full-time programs in schools, academies, colleges, training providers, local authority providers, and how that market is significantly different as well. And the expectations of that market, for example, in progression to employment, progression to HE is quite significant. And for adults, those adults that we've not already looked at in apprenticeships or loan funded, excuse me, some of those adults are obviously paying a proportion of the cost of their learning, but a significant number are still relying on the commissioners of adult education, whether that be the Skills Funding Agency or in future local commissioners such as authorities or learning enterprise partnerships. What kind of markets there are there in terms of the needs of those learners, re-engagement, progression, trying to get jobs, personal development, learning languages, etc. So there are significant changes in the markets for learning, and however you differentiate or distinguish between those markets, they're going to require an appropriate response from us. At the same time, though, what we're offering learners in those markets is changing, what we often call product development. And here is the different types of learning programs, whether they be qualifications, non-accredited provision. You can see the significant changes that are occurring. For example, study programs that we're offering 16 to 19, a different product from what we offered before, much more holistic, with at its core English, maths, tutorial, work experience, careers. The new AS and A levels, a challenge as we go through that reform. The traineeships that are offering both young people and adults who want to progress into employment, preferably with apprenticeships. The apprenticeship standards, which are very different from frameworks, significantly more learning in some cases, endpoint assessment. The products are changing quite dramatically. And of course on the horizon we've got the new technical and professional qualifications, the T levels, which will start to be introduced from 2019. Again, radically different from the many qualifications that we've been doing up to now. And at the same time, changes in the nature of higher education, higher apprenticeships, higher education being offered in further education and other environments, and also, as we said, in the workplace. And underpinning this, quite significant changes in the way that learners want to learn. More flexible learning patterns, for example, blended learning, the use of e-learning, different times, different pace, different environments for learning. Excuse me. So there are quite significant changes in both the markets for learning and also in the nature of what we offer those markets in terms of learning programs. And this can obviously lead to quite significant responses from those learners in terms of their perceptions of what's happening, their reactions to the changes, and their expectations. And these might all change. Certainly the understanding and information and knowledge of what's happening in the learning market and the nature of the products we're offering, that will change. People's expectations, whether it be young people, adults or employers, are changing. The value they attach to learning, the contribution it makes to their personal lives, the return on their investment, the improvements in, say, productivity and profitability if it's an employer. And all of this has an impact on the trust that the learner has with us, the providers. Now, in some cases, that can be significantly changed for positive, in a positive way. I think employers' expectations of the standards and the levy are going to rise. I think people who take out loans have got expectations of what that will mean to them in terms of personal development, progression, etc. And at the same time, I think all of the different users are attaching much more value to the nature of what we offer, particularly if they're investing through a loan, through co-investment, or through the levy. So those are all in being impacted on in a positive way. But at the same time, I think there are some less positive aspects of this. All of the changes in the markets and in the nature of the products can mean that many people who use those products, many different types of learners, and ourselves as providers can often find that our understanding, our knowledge, and our confidence in those well-tested brands, those well-tested products will often change. So if we move from frameworks to standards, understanding of employers and of apprentices can actually start to go down. And at the same time, I think that has a negative impact on trust. And one of the big issues in developing that relationship with learners that we all try as providers is to ensure there's a relationship based on trust, and that trust then means that we can retain the learners and offer them progression, etc. And I think with this lack of information, the lack of knowledge, the uncertainty in the market, there are some aspects of trust that I think will be reduced. With that in mind, and this is leading into what Geoff's going to talk about today, I think there's some key considerations for all of us, whether you're a college, training provider, local authority, or any other agency involved in delivering learning to those different markets. I think the first thing is, do we actually understand the changes? Are we feeling as an organisation that we understand the difference between frameworks and standards, the new T levels, what's happening in terms of A levels, what's happening in terms of blended learning, etc., and the implications this has for each of our markets? For example, have we all thought through the implications of loan-funded learners and how that dynamic is now different and their expectations are different? And that immediately starts to raise questions about our own workforce. Have we got the right knowledge, the capabilities and resources? If not, what are we planning to meet those changes and those expectations? For example, in apprenticeships, how is the role of the assessor changing? Is it becoming more of a tutor role? Have we got the right knowledge and skills, for example, to deliver the increasing demand for English and maths? I think we've got to be clear about how our products, what is basically the offer that we're making to the markets in terms of qualifications, programs of learning, how are they changing, and how is that going to change in the light of those reforms and the impacts that's going to have on, for example, the perceptions of our learners. I think added to that, and this is increasingly a feature as we move into the new apprenticeship challenge, is do we know what we're going to sell? Are we going to continue with the same offer? Are we going to drop some of our provision, increase some of provision? And how are we going to sell it? How are we going to engage with those different users, particularly if their perceptions and the knowledge have changed significantly? And what happens if that trust cannot be rebuilt? So I think there are big issues there about how we're going to make that offer known to people and how we're going to get them to engage with us. And I think we've got to therefore have a clear plan about how we can raise the perceived value of what we're doing. With that uncertainty, with that lack of trust, how can we build on expectations and increase the value or the perception of that value? For all of us, I think, whether you're a small or large provider, I think we've got to look at how we establish our difference and better. It is still a competitive market. There are new entrants coming into the market. For example, look at the number of HEIs that have got through the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers that see this as a market. How are we going to distinguish ourselves, and how are we going to make ourselves different and better in terms of that offer? And I think, therefore, we need to be clear that with all these changes, with area reviews, with mergers, with new entrants coming into the market, this is the right time to maybe reevaluate or evaluate our position in the market for learning. Which markets are we staying in? Which ones might we leaving? How are we going to respond to those different demands and perceptions? And I think underpinning all of this is how do we intend to build a brand that makes our position in market clear, or in some cases, take that brand that we already have, and if we need to, rebuild it, reform it, and restructure it. So with that in mind, and thanks very much for the comments that are coming through so far, I'm now going to hand over to Geoff. Geoff, over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Beej. Actually, there's quite an interesting link there, I think, that I should say right at the start here, that the brand is always a servant of the strategy, not the other way around. Sometimes I do hear people saying the brand is everything. Yeah, it's got an important job to do, but the job it has to do is dependent on what strategy you set, what markets you're going into, who you're trying to target. So I want to talk about building a brand as the sort of first step to effective marketing, and I want to really start by exploding a few myths, and these are, in that 20 years I've been working in this, that I need to sort of perhaps break open. One is building a brand is not about having a lovely shiny new logo. It's often, I've seen organisations go straight to that. You might need to do that, you might not need to do that, but it's not the starting point, that is for sure. Not even all about advertising and promotion. That's, again, a part to play, but in building the brand is far more than that. The myth that we can just leave it to the marketeers, if we have those people in our organisation, they understand how brands work, only they know. Well, they have a very important job to do, and they will coordinate, but actually we all understand how brand works, and part of what I've had to do over the years is get people to understand that they do know how brands work, and they're not actually that complex a thing, and people can engage in it. The final point, which I sometimes come across, well, we don't really have a brand, and it's not really an issue for us, and I think that's potentially a dangerous thought to have, and I just want to tackle that one first, if I may. This is an excerpt from a blog I wrote about a year ago, and like I said, this is what I did this week. I had a meeting with a firm of solicitors. I took my computer to be fixed. That evening I went playing bingo, wonderful thing to do. The next morning I went off to see a stately home, then I met my accountant, and I met a government department. Now, are you sympathetic or are you envious of my wonderful week? Now, I'd suggest most of you out there are thinking, I'm pretty it's not envy I'm thinking. It doesn't sound like the greatest week on earth. That's because what I didn't talk about any of the brands that I went to. So, for instance, I could have gone and played Rebel Bingo, which, check that one out. A lot of young people playing it in nightclubs. Really fun, exciting thing to do. I may have had an experience in the Apple store when I went to fix my computer, and that's quite different to queuing up in an old computer shop being taught jargon. I may have gone to Chatsworth and seen some fine art from Sotheby's actually in the park. I've now introduced brands into this, but what happened without the absence of those brands, and this is really important for many of us, is that in the absence of a strong brand, the reputation, it isn't non-existent. It actually defaults to a reputation that the sector has. So that, for instance, bingo is down market, that stately homes are for a wet Wednesday afternoon and they're a bit dry. And that's what people do. So usually a sector will have a default position in people's minds. It might be positive, but often it's not. Often it defaults to something fairly negative.
So Geoff, you've not worked in the further education or skills sector. What sort of default situation have you got for your perception of the sector?
Well, good question. I mean, well, first of all, I would say that's probably a perception that's 30 years old, which is a problem in itself. But for me, it's technical skills. It's about day release. It's about doing interesting practical things. It may be for people who don't want to go into A-levels and those sorts of things, and frankly I don't know. But what I would say is actually my perception of it is pretty relevant.
Yeah.
The default that you need to understand is the audiences you are trying to attract, be those are the employees of today or those young people. How are they defaulting it? You need to understand that. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay. So what I want to cover what is a brand, why is it important to develop it, how are they built in today's world, because the world of building brands has changed significantly over the last 10, 15, 20 years with the power of the internet. A few practicalities of how you go about it, and then what you might do with it, having defined what your brand's all about, how you might move on to the next stages, and we might touch on what they look like, obviously not in a lot of depth. So I'll try and make this fairly fun and interesting, and if I can, and go through. What is a brand? Okay, first of all, I've just put some logos up there. Now that's something I said earlier, logo last, not first. And what I'm trying to say here is if you're developing your brand, trying to define your brand, the thinking process comes first. The creative visualization process comes later if you need it. I've put up a whole stack of logos there, but they are not brands, they're simply logos. Visual identities that hopefully people recognize, but what's critical here is as you recognize each one of those, these all happen to be retailers, what is conjured up in your mind? What's the instant recognition you get in your mind? Powerful brands will have that instant recognition in the audiences they are trying to attract. So if I take a sector perhaps we all understand, and this is the airline sector, and if I did this exercise with people and said, look, I've got an airline brand that's fairly youthful and quite fun, I've got one that's formal and quite established, and one that's very value driven, how would you position them? Almost inevitably people would position those three brands that I've just picked up there in that way. Virgin builds on that Virgin brand that's been driven in many different sectors of being quite young and quite youthful. British Airways keeps this formal, established, and of course EasyJet has been one of, but not the only pioneer of a value-driven market. But the point is, it's not the logo that's driving your thinking there. It's not. You see the logo, you recognise the brand, but what's driving it is what are they saying about themselves, but also what experience have I had of those, and what experience have I heard other people talking about? I mean, I've flown Virgin Atlantic, but some of my friends have, they've talked about it. And that whole thing, that whole experience together defines what that brand is and puts that picture in your mind. But the brand itself is not just the communications, and this is important. It's the products, it's the people that are delivering the products, it's the processes people go through when they engage. That whole customer experience, it's what is going to develop your brand, as well as the things you say about yourself. And frankly, if the things you say about yourself are different from the experience that people have, then that is a recipe for a brand that's going to start deteriorating and falling apart. So I want to sort of having established that principle, let's just do thing then, and the first part of it. Now this is something I've done Beej quite a few times when I've been asked to do big conferences about brands. I say, okay, this is my mind trick, and how I can read people's minds. So I'm about to put a brand up on the screen, and people don't need to type in or shout out, but in their own mind, the first thing that comes into their heads about that brand, the first words that hit them. So here's the brand. This probably appeals to, works better for people of a certain age, but nevertheless. So there you go. So now I don't even know if that's the latest logo, it doesn't matter, but there's a brand. I would almost guarantee that most of us have said one or more of these three things in our heads. Safe, reliable, and sadly some people will have said it's a bit boring for me.
I'd have said that. I'd have said it, Geoff.
Well, the point about that is, and this is the point about brands and strong brands, is they are owning a space in our minds. That's what great brands do. They instant recognition, and in people's heads, they own a space. They don't own it by accident, they own it by design, by thinking about where they need to position themselves, how they need to position themselves, and then how to own that space in people's minds. Sorry, I'll take that.
John just added, by the way, Volvo, solid.
Solid, there you go.
Thank you, John.
Exactly right. It makes the point. Now, obviously, if you're Volvo, then you probably do want to be seen as reliable. You do want to be seen as solid. You might not want to be seen as boring. And if there's a sliver of the audience who see you that way, but it could be that that's the sliver of the audience you're not trying to appeal to anyway. So it doesn't matter. You're trying to get to those people who put reliability and solidity at the heart, and that's your audience. And if you own that, others will find it very difficult to get into that space. Because there's a point here about brands that stay in the middle of the road can get run over. So I'll put some brands. I would argue, and I'll put the NHS a bit controversial, but I've put some brands. I think each one of these are great brands. That doesn't mean I'm particularly attracted to them. You might look at them and say, I'd never fly Ryanair. You'd never get me shopping at Waitrose. You'd never get me going into Greggs. That doesn't matter. All right, that doesn't really matter. What it matters is that they have an audience they appeal to and they position themselves. So Newquay is about surfing, and Premier Inn is about great night's sleep, and Waitrose is about high-end, and Aldi is owning value, and Ryanair similarly.
But what about, there's a question from Gordon, what about when there's a manufacturer or a company has too many products?
Yes.
And therefore the brand itself can be a bit confusing.
Yeah, there's got to, absolutely right. I'm going to talk, who is that, Gordon, is it? I'm going to talk later, Gordon, about something called brand architecture. Many organisations do develop many products, and they often start then what they think is branding them or giving them titles and names, and the whole thing becomes very, very confusing. And I've seen that a lot I've seen it in care services, housing services, all sorts of things. And if you haven't got a clear brand strategy and a brand architecture, which is how your brand's going to sit, that can be a big danger, and the market gets confused. There are ways to think your way through that, and if I can buy a bit of time, I'm going to come back later. I'm going to touch it on briefly, but if that's okay. It's a really, really good point.
Good question, Gordon.
Yeah, really good. So, when you think about your brand, it's your reputation that's out there in the market with the audiences. It's an implicit promise to those audiences that you're trying to attract. And it provides a strength or a weakness against which you're going to sell your services. It's not a logo. That's what I'm trying to say here. Why is it important? Now, there's quite a lot of data about aligned brands, the ones who have a promise and deliver it, and it's very clear. I didn't want to sort of swamp you with data. Just a few quotes I just think are quite the guy at Amazon that's been an amazing brand that's developed over the years. The brand is what people say about when you're not in the room. What a fantastic thought that is to take away. So you've got to work out, what do we want people to be saying about us when we're not in the room? That's why I say brand development starts as a thinking process and then a creative process later. I've used this for 20 odd years, Quakeros. If this business was to split up, I'd be glad to take the brands, the trademarks and the goodwill. You can have the bricks, the mortar, the machinery. I'll make more money than you do. You can move your college from one building to another building to another building. The reputation of that brand is what's going to get people coming back to you. And then a client who said, when he was having a discussion with the rest of his people, said, you know, I don't think we've got an option here because people will have a view of us. He was thinking about the category reputation. Good or bad, if we choose not to develop our brand, others will do it for us. That is also a concern that you can have, and you can see in many different markets where strong brands actually start repositioning others just by what they're doing. So you could argue that the EasyJets and Ryanairs started to reposition some of the other airlines as expensive and getting people to think of them in a certain way because of the way they position themselves. So I want to just have a little think about how your brand actually influences the whole purchasing decision of whoever those audiences are, as Beej laid them out earlier. Now, what I've got on the left here is a fairly classic buying structure. So people start by perceiving some sort of need for something, they go searching for information, they evaluate the alternatives, they assess the value, they make a decision, and then importantly, they have an experience having purchased that decision, which will drive, hopefully, satisfaction and ultimately advocacy, which is people talking to other people. So the strength of the brand impacts at all stages here. It might even be such a strong brand that you elevate a perceived need in the minds of the customer. I've heard so much about this great place, I didn't even think about I might need a new apprenticeship program, but hey, this brand's getting me to think about that. The search, the way you position, the personality, the brand values that come through will make sure you're on the radar. If I'm looking around for someone, I ought to be looking at that one. It may also help reposition others. In fact, I don't have much experience in further education, but I heard something the other day where there was a researcher had said what people were saying is because they understood that this particular college had access to university, I can't remember what it was starting to get into question why the others weren't. So and that's how it works. And I think a really important bit that the post-purchase experience, this happens in lots of markets as we know, but you make a decision now, you've gone through that process. I might not start to experience what I've purchased for some time in the future, be that you're waiting for a new car to be delivered or you're waiting for the course to start or whatever. And often in that period, your perceptions and your motivations can get moved. Mm-hmm. You know, plus if you go into the pub, you've just ordered your brand new car, spent a lot of money, and you walk in and somebody says, not one of those.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't work properly.
Or you go to Asda and you've just said that your son or daughter is going to XY college, and someone says, oh, did you see that inspection report?
Exactly.
Did you see what was in the newspapers?
Yeah. So what great brands are, having built their position, they think about how do they keep in touch with those people and keep reinforcing, be that welcome packed, keeping in touch, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot to think about that. It's about rational and emotional. People always think people buy rationally. They don't. They buy everything rationally and emotionally. All purchasing decisions are both emotional and rational, the heart and the head. Always, and some of you might be thinking, well, not everything. Okay, there might be something, but very little. The biggest purchase we ever make is a house. Probably at home, we might pay anything up to quarter of £1,000,000 for something.
Not in Romford.
Not in Romford, no. But when you're spending that sort of money, how many of us have walked through the front door and said, you know, it just sort of felt right.
Yeah.
You know. So that's what happens, and you've got to get that balance of emotional and rationality, and that might vary, of course. But it's easy to overlook them, and they can be the most powerful motivators to purchase. So you need to understand in all those audiences. You need to really dig a little bit deeper to understand what's driving.
And Geoff had a good comment from an adult learner at one of the colleges that had moved to a new campus.
Yeah.
And the campus was, I would say, predominantly in the reception area, full of very young people, you know, quite noisy, etc. And that adult said, I'm not sure if this is the place for me. I didn't feel comfortable. I did not feel comfortable. That's an emotion, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely instant reaction. On some things at the bottom comment there was a piece of research I did some time ago with an oil company, and they'd done a classic satisfaction survey. They were getting 8 out of 10. They thought they were doing okay. When you dig deep, and that's my point here, you need to dig deep. Actually, you found out there were some really dissatisfied elements to that customer. And therefore, I'm saying, really, if you're going to understand this, you're going to do this position, you need a little bit of insight, and you need to dig deep with that insight. So, how do you build them? How do you go about it? First of all, I want to leave you, go away with nothing, leave with it. It's Mike Leisner's definition of a brand, and used it for many, many years. Brand is a living entity. It's enriched or undermined cumulatively over time, the product of 1,000 small gestures. You don't really know quite why you chose it, but it just keeps doing the right things in the right way. That's as good a definition as you'll see for those of us who use people and processes to deliver our brands. It has some implications. And I said that the way brands are built is changing, and it's very much changing. The experience now rules in the way brands are built. Back in the day, I'm old enough to remember where you could employ a great creative agency to come up with fantastic ads, and hey-ho, you built your brand. In these days, everybody can tell the world what their experience is. And if that experience doesn't match what you're saying about yourself, they will tell not just their friends, as we all used to say, 8 people or whatever it is, they can tell the world by the internet. So we're in a very, very different world. So customer experience becomes vital. So I'd say there are some fundamentals you need to consider. One, you need to understand what motivates your potential audience. You need to do that insight. You need to recognize that it's going to be built through 1,000 small gestures, not just through a bit of creative marketing. You have to build your brand from within. This is a cross-functional piece of thinking because it has to have a commitment to its delivery through the experience that it gets. So you need to, typically you need to engage certainly the whole of the SLT in the thinking process about your brand. Everybody's going to have a role in delivering it, so they need to be engaged with it, they need to understand it, and that really also moves to my final point. It shouldn't be complicated, it shouldn't be theoretical. I've worked in this long enough to see some incredibly theoretical structures around brands, but if people can't understand them, then they're not going to deliver them. So you've got to keep it as simple as you
And I can recount last Friday I went to visit one of our partner providers in a beautiful setting in Staffordshire, and everything from the car park was clean, roomy, the reception was welcoming, I was seen to straight away, coffee was provided immediately, a little croissant. The whole of the experience from every single person working in that organisation was about me getting the maximum satisfaction.
Yes, okay, and what I would say is even better if that whole experience has been designed to build against the brand that you've decided you want to be.
Yeah.
Because at one level there's great customer experience, and then there's the experience our brand will deliver.
Yeah.
So I think that's okay. So now keeping it simple. Now I did a lot of work in leisure, and Merlin Entertainment is interested in doing theme parks and things. And one of the things they always say is the board have to get it, but so does the boy or the girl selling the burger. So you've got to keep this simple. Everybody needs to understand it. So I think there's three elements really of a brand. A positioning, which I've already talked about, a unique space in people's minds that we seek to own. A set of brand values. Now, I know people often have organisational values, but brand values are the fundamental principles and standards that drives the way the brand acts. And if I stand on the outside as one of the audiences, I will see those values coming through. I don't mean I'll read them, I'll see them and I'll feel them. So there's probably a whole webinar on internal, external values, but the simple way to think, teamwork I often see as a value. It's a great value, teamwork. Externally, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
So I need to see the things that go. And third one is personality, which is the way the brand interacts, the tone of voice it has, the style it has. And what you have to do is the thinking process to define all those things, the positioning, the values, and the tone of voice. If you can do that, it works.
And just for a minute, Geoff, if I just come in, I think we've got another question there.
Right.
Is it Kerry? Oh, thanks very much for that. Thought-provoking, thank you. And it's about the parity of esteem within the organisation. All parts of the organisation, student services is often perceived as of lower status within the brand. I think that's a good point,
Absolutely.
Kerry. And what Geoff's saying is there's no part of the organisation that's not a key part of the brand.
Absolutely.
It's the parity of esteem that we're talking about. So it's caretakers, it's the reception staff,
absolutely.
It's everyone involved. And then, for example, in terms of, I think with apprenticeships, very often that group of people that are not included in all of this, like the assessors and the workplace, the reviewers. So I think that's a very good point. Thanks, Kerry. That's critical.
The great brand building processes I've seen, Kerry, have really touched on everybody and their role in the whole roll-up, as it has to be, of course. Sorry, just trying to work the technology. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, I just want to talk about positioning first, and because positioning is the first place you get to how are we going to position this brand, what's our position. And I just want to make the point that this is not yet a clever strapline. Sometimes people think, this is a bit of marketing spin that we're trying to come up with. No, it's not. I'm using this as an example. Please don't have a view of Tesco as a brand, good or bad. I've not done any work with them, and I'm not an advocate for them or a detractor. But what we'll all recognise is their strapline, which is every little helps. It's on everything. That's not a brand position. That's a creative interpretation of a brand position. I happen to know people who've worked on this, and that brand position is this. Very simple. No one works harder for customers. That's what they've decided is going to drive their brand. We've never seen that on a piece of communication from them because it sits internal, and that's how they want to be seen. I think there's a very, very good argument that they're probably not doing it very well, but that's by the by. The creative agency has come up with every little helps. You could say, right, time to refresh the creative look and feel, come up with a new strapline, but don't forget that's the position we're constantly trying to reinforce.
And that's quite interesting because with myself and Gordon, we visited a grade 1 provider, remember 2 or 3 years ago, Gordon, and that was actually in the inspection report. It said that no one works harder for the students than all the staff in that organisation. Right. Well, and that was quite an interesting statement.
Absolutely.
No one works harder. It's fascinating.
Well, take that back to my Volvo. If that organisation's, when that name is mentioned, if the population is saying nobody works harder, then you have got one powerful brand position. But you don't get that overnight, of course. Now, people often say, how do you get all these people to understand brands? Oh my goodness, it's it's all complicated stuff. It isn't. This is one of those simple ways of it. I use this exercise a lot. I do it very quickly. I say, think about your newspapers. I'm going to put 3 morning newspapers. Please, you'll hate some of these, you'll love some of these. That's not the issue here. And I say to people in training sessions, look, tell me what the positioning is, tell me what values they've got, and tell me what sort of personality. And I usually have a little bit of fun and say, you can give me a real personality if you like, a real person that represents these. So if you get the Times, people will talk about, well, it's probably factual news, is straight and factual news. What values? Business-like, unemotional, factual, accurate. If it was a person, who would it be? Oh, I'm not sure about this. Maybe somebody, maybe a Branson. Maybe that's a bit too much. But I don't know, something like that. What about the Daily Mail? Oh, Daily Mail. And I say to people, I don't want to know you if you don't like it. I want you to think that it's your brand. Well, the Defender of Middle England, that's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard. They're challenging, they're patriotic, they're vocal, right? That's the values. Personality, Victor Meldrew, they're always angry about something. Okay, that's fine. What about the Sun? It's simple news for the working man. Well, that's what it is, simple news for the working man. What are its values? It's fun, it's celebrity, it's also patriotic, but it's got a bit more fun about it. It's probably Katie Price, that's its person, that's its tone of voice. Now, they've got the same product, that's just the news, that's all they're dealing with, same stories. And I just want to show you how brand positioning, value, personality then manifests itself. Remember this fella, that's Fred Goodwin, RBS, had an affair with his secretary, and it was reported in every paper. This is how those 3 brands did it. That was the Times. It is exposed as the injunction is breached. Former RBS chief has affair with colleagues. Very straight, it's very factual, it's unemotional. It's on brand. Yeah. The angry Defender of Middle England, of course, this. The Fred's affair, why we do have a right to know, and it's all in capitals, do's underlined, and the subtext. Sexual relationship with a married senior colleague on the eve of a 45 billion, don't forget they were losing all that money. So it's very angry, it's playing its role, it's Victor Meldrew. It doesn't bloody believe it can be as bad. And of course the Sun is Fred the bed. Simple news, fun, celebrity, and on it goes. Take people through that exercise. They really get those 3 elements of brand, and they can engage with it. So, practicalities. You do need good insight about the motivations of those customers. You asked me about my view of FE. my view is irrelevant unless I'm one of your target audience. That's how I would say to it. You need to get under the skin and find that. You need to create the positioning, the values, and the personality in a cross-functional way. For me, it's a workshop environment. It demands engagement, people putting in their thoughts about how the provider should position it.
So it's a good one. I'm just thinking about Kerry's response there.
Yeah.
I can just come in there, Geoff.
Of course, yeah.
The motivations of adults who take out an advanced learner loan, sometimes they're taking out a loan for £3,500 to £4,000. We've got to understand, it's not the loan, it's what's their motivation to do any learning. Why has that adult decided they want to do a level 3 diploma in, say, massage? But immediately you say that, then I start thinking about how does everyone plug in? So the receptionist at the training provider, when they meet that loan-funded learner, do they understand this person's making quite a big decision to go back to learning after all those years?
Yes.
How does it relate to the tutor? How does it relate to all the things that support? That sort of cross-functional thing, I think, in response to what Kerry said, is absolutely critical.
What they're nervous about.
Yeah, exactly.
What barriers are there?
And that's why student services and all the other staff that are involved in the pastoral are as critical here to establishing that brand.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I would also say, and this is where you can actually engage more people in the organisation in the very early stages, is I said it's a workshop. You're trying to work out how to position what the values might be. But it's not a consensus exercise. I don't expect to come out of that event with the answer that everybody agrees with, because you should test it. You test it in the organisation.
Yeah.
And you should test it out with the audiences again. And then through that testing position, you refine it and you've engaged more colleagues in the whole development of the thing. Because my argument is if we've developed it ourselves, we will deliver it.
Yes.
If we've handed it over to Geoff Barnsley and said, just come up with something, nobody will deliver it because they've not built it. So you have to build it from within. And the testing is blending attractiveness with deliverability. So you need to know that that position will attract the audiences you want, but you also need to know that you are capable of delivering it. That might mean you need to do some work, but it's not out of your, it's not ridiculous for you to deliver.
So I said to my adult returner staying out alone, we're going to offer this at weekends, we're going to offer it in big blocks, we're going to do it partly through e-learning, you can bring your kids along. Now that's then got to be matched by what actually happens.
And if in the testing people say, I'm sorry, I'll give you an example from another brand. We did some work on the repositioning of Blackpool.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of positions that were very attractive to help shape it over 10 years, but one of them was just too far. It wasn't. It was about total relaxation. You could never have it there. Yeah. So people said attractive to me, but they can't deliver it. Not even with development.
No. Yeah.
Okay. So now then, sort of Gordon's point here. What about sub-brands or sub-products or sub-names? Now, I could spend a lot of time on this, and I can't afford to do the time here, but one thing I want to talk about is brand architecture. And this is where you need the thinking and a structure around how you're going to structure your brands, which will allow you to add services and products in a way that's coherent and understandable. So there are about 17 different brand structures. I've got, but these are the 4 main ones, and I'll just quickly go through each one. You'll understand them. A branded house is like a Virgin, right? Yeah. Where you say, or Disney for that option. There is one single brand, and it is all powerful. And in a branded house, all your new services are simply descriptors. So Virgin Media, Virgin Trains, Virgin Atlantic, okay, is slightly different on that, but we know what it is.
Virgin Money.
Virgin Money. It's all about Virgin. You are buying Virgin. If you're buying Virgin and you buy into its values and you're attracted, then you take that product. Right at the other end of the scale, at the house of brands on the right-hand side there, is like a Procter & Gamble, or in the work I've done in Merlin Entertainments, where you have many individual brands like Sea Life, Legoland Discovery Centres, Alton Towers. These are all individual brands within a group, and there you're creating those individual brands, and the parent brand is actually quite lost. I don't think that's a model for
education and skills.
Not at all. But that's and it demands big budgets. Now in between you've got a couple of interesting ones. Sub-brands are interesting where you are trying to create a brand that stands out, and also the parent brand, so they're almost equally strong. So an example there might be an Apple iPod or an Apple iPad.
Mm-hmm.
So an Apple iPod is an MP3 player. Now that would, over a branded house, would be a Virgin MP3 player.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is create an Apple brand and an iPod. So kids are saying, I want an iPod, I want an iPad, I want an iPhone.
Yeah.
Endorsed brands is another interesting one, and I think might have some relevance depending on the services you're putting together. That's where you use the parent brand to endorse a new sub-brand. So a good example, the hotels use it a lot. So Courtyard, which is a slightly budget brand, is by Marriott, and it says by Marriott. So it's saying, you're getting, don't forget, you're getting this from this brand. So if you've got a college or whatever, and you had a whole scheme you wanted to brand, but the college had built a great reputation, you'd make sure that there was an endorsing element to that, and that can be.
So it could be a 14 to 16 centre by XY College.
Yeah, and it could be, but you might even want to call that Powerhouse or something, because it's got an individual drive by XY College. Yeah, so you get that endorsing principle, and if Powerhouse is strong, it also helps build the parent. So, so that was a little side about how you do that. Right, just getting to the end now. In terms of what you do with it, when you've developed it and you've got that and you've cleared it and you've tested it and you've refined it and you've got something, and I think this probably sort of fits the what comes next category. There are three things you can now do with it, and you should do with it. One is you've got to engage your people. You will have engaged them through the testing process, but you've got more to do. You have to develop the customer experience. There's a whole science to that makes it an on-brand experience, and that means looking at the customer journeys and the motivations and how you're going to deal with it.
We often use that term in our sector, the learner journey. So from the first point of contact with the institution right through to after they've left.
Yeah.
What do we do in terms of after sales, in terms of progression? So we use that term a lot.
Well, I think we'd cover this on a later thing.
On a later webinar.
But what you would see here is not just what do we do, but you'd start with how do they feel?
Yeah.
You take it back earlier in the decision process. How do they feel? How does our brand want them to feel?
Yeah.
This brand would want them to feel like this at this point. Then how do we do that? And you develop the journey that way. And of course, you can start thinking about your communication, which is probably where a lot of people come into brand thinking that's where you start. And now you're in a position to say, okay, how do we start communicating our message? What are our messages? What are our sub messages? What are we going to say to each audience that's reflective of the brand we're trying to
Absolutely.
And it becomes part of what I would call the brand alignment plan. So
I think at this point we might have another question.
Right.
Let's just check. I'm just coming down to it. Oh yeah, we've just got another question now. Let's just pop that one back. And this question is, we've got different users of post-16 further education and skills. We've got students themselves, the parents, the employers, Ofsted. How do you manage to meet all of those different perceptions through one brand?
Well, the first thing is that that's why the development of the brand, as the way I've described it, is so important. That you come up with options and you do the tests and you get the feedback, so you refine it. And what you're looking for is a brand position and a set of values that are big enough and relevant enough to appeal across the piece.
Yeah.
But then what you then can develop is propositions for each audience. So the proposition is based on their needs, but it feeds off that parent brand. And typically, you'd hear me saying things like, you look for the values you've really got to dial up and dial down.
So for parents, you might dial up safety, security.
Absolutely.
For the student, excitement, skills. For the employer, relevance. Yeah.
but in the core values, all those they'll all be there.
So you dial up some and you dial up down others,
and you come out with a proposition for that.
Great question. Thanks for the question. Thanks
Yeah.
for the answer there. That's great. Thank you.
Excellent.
And we've another question from Gordon. Thinking about area reviews and the mergers that are occurring in the college sector. How do we establish? Is this an opportunity to establish a brand, a new brand, or do we rebuild one of the brands? What's your suggestion on that?
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, I can't speak for individual situations. Personally, and over the years, I've seen this merger in all sorts of organisations. I think this is an absolute ideal process to go through at that point, because there's always that sense of takeover. A has taken over B. You've got a team, you've got a new team, should come together. This is a process that engages that team in how do we want to position ourselves. So for me, you start from fresh, and you do it in a way that engages everybody. So you actually build something, as opposed to, well, we'll just shuffle you under our brand and off we go. So I think you've got a chance to make something really, really, really work. Okay, just a couple of final thoughts then. I think this is a quote I've used a lot. I've learned that people forget what you said. They will. They'll forget your comms, they'll forget your ads, they'll forget your leaflets. They'll actually forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And when I walked into that reception, I felt as if it was professional, and I felt it was the right place, and I felt it was welcoming. I couldn't just remember what it did. But really, a summary of what I've got to say about this, and I appreciate I've only really touched on a fairly deep subject, but a fairly high level. Things to take away: logo last. The brand's more about what you do than what you say. You might want to do an identity change, yes, but do the thinking first. It's a cross-functional process. It needs to be built from within, because if it's not built from within, it will not get delivered. The customer experience won't get delivered, and you won't build the brand. You need to stimulate that thinking process through a bit of insight, and I think those researchers who are listening in, this is about qual, not quant. You know, ticking boxes and scoring is not what you need at this stage. It's let's talk to some of these people. Let's find what's driving them. Let's find what's motivating them. The brand, once you've defined it, should be expressed in a very compelling, clear, in a non-complex way, so that people can really understand it and be part of its delivery. So no one works harder for customers. You know, it's a great rallying call if you think about it. It's very, very clear. It doesn't need interpretation.
And Geoff, in that inspection report, not only did it say how hard all the staff worked for the students, they also commented on how hard the students worked. So there's that establishing that brand, that culture. The brand was lived by everyone who was partner to it, not just the providers, but also the customers, the learners. So it establishes that in their head as well.
Well, the strongest brands create that emotion attachment that people actually like to be associated with it. I mean,
exactly.
That's it. And the final point is it will help you once you've done your thinking and you've got this carefully crafted. Then it'd be much easier to think about what that customer experience needs to look like. You know, if we are the most professional college in the region, then the customer experience needs to reflect that. If we're the most fun, it needs to reflect that. If we're the most engaging, you understand the point. And it also means you can start writing very clear communications briefs for any creative agency you might be using. I don't do any creative, it's not my skill set, and I'm a great fan of great creative, but creative agencies will tell you their work is driven by a great brief. Often they're just come up with something new and fresh. Give them a brief that says, this is us, this is what we're trying to say, these are our values, this is our tone of voice. We're trying to get this message over. They'll do a much, much better job.
Well, that's really useful. Thanks, Geoff.
Okay.
Thank you, and maybe you want to take a wee refreshment.
Yes, I will.
But so I think that's this is the first of our series of webinars with Geoff and with other colleagues that we'll be looking at. And I think it gives us an opportunity to test out from you today how well you think the webinar's gone for you, whether you found it useful. We had some very positive comments already. Thanks very much. I think it's certainly got us to think about some of the things that we need to do to follow up on this, looking at, for example, some of the specific things that Geoff mentioned, and we will do, and we'll put those out to you in the near future. Are there any other comments or questions? Because we've had some excellent questions and comments. Thanks very much for the participation from all of those that have participated. I think for me there's some key messages that keep on coming through. We talked about those changing markets for learning. We talked about the changing nature of the products, the courses, the provision that we make. But I think from that point of view that it's more than just the learning course or the learning provision. It's all of that experience, and it's the whole experience that the students and the learners get in terms of all aspects of it. How safe do they feel? How well supported? How well are they catered for in terms of their individual needs? So all those things we talked about, student services, learning support, and it's not just about buildings, because I think one of the things that I certainly picked up from what Geoff said is, and I've been involved in restructuring institutions where we moved to new buildings, and that hasn't necessarily meant that we're in a better position in the market.
No.
So I think that itself is one aspect of it, but again, plenty of things there to think about. So I think each user has got different perceptions of the value of what we offer in post-16 provision, and Geoff's looked at how we can do that by making those appropriate propositions to each one of those under a strong brand. We looked at the changing context and impact of mergers. We also looked at the issues about some of us are offering many different experiences under that one brand. So Geoff's offered us a range of ways of looking at that. But I think also it is important to look at these issues in the light of all these quite significant changes. And hopefully if today has helped, we really want to thank you. We want to thank you. There's excellent comment there from Don. Thanks very much for very professionally done. We do feel very good. That's thank you, Don. That's making us feel really good. Don, you can be on any of our focus groups, but thanks for that. We really appreciate that. And I think what also is, if you've got any suggestions for more things that you'd like us to do on the themes of branding, marketing, etc., please get in touch. And we are going to, and the customer experience, we said we will do one on the customer experience, the learner journey as we call it, although we might give it another name.
Okay.
Because I think this journey, I often hear, Geoff, that journey is often used an X factor. I'm on my journey to stardom. Not everyone gets there.
The experience is what I want. The journey is just what I have to do.
That's right. Well, that's a good message there. And also, if any of you are interested in getting in touch with us, what we'll do is we'll give you Geoff's details when we send you the slides and the recording. And if you want to contact Geoff directly, he'll be happy for you to do that. If you want to discuss, as he said, he's an independent consultant working with us, so we're very pleased to promote his services to you. Thanks very much from June and Mary and all the feedback we've got. That's excellent feedback. Thanks very much. And obviously hope to hear from you and see you in the future. Thanks very much, Marek, for your service and support today. I think we can now